My name is Ashley Carter. I am 24 years old, living in Boston, Massachusetts. After years of hard work, juggling both studying and working, I finally completed my MBA program and stood on stage to receive the degree I had traded countless sleepless nights for. That day should have been one of the happiest and proudest moments of my life. Yet when I looked out into the audience, the two seats I had reserved for my parents remained empty, cold, and glaring amidst the crowd filled with cheers and waving hands from friends celebrating their children. I had hoped, I had waited, I had told myself that this time they would come, but in the end, that hope shattered like all the times before. In my parents' eyes, all of my efforts were nothing more than a trivial event, the achievement of a bottom daughter who was never worthy of pride. At that very same moment, my mother was posting videos on social media, smiling radiantly aboard a Caribbean cruise, raising champagne glasses with my sister Vanessa and her family. That blow not only hurt me, but also turned my pain into a public spectacle for others to laugh at. If you have ever felt abandoned, belittled by the very people who were supposed to love you most, I want to ask, where are you watching this story from, so I know that I am not alone? My childhood was tied to a quiet suburban neighborhood west of Boston, where houses with white fences lined the streets, lawns were neatly trimmed, and kids often gathered to play baseball at the small park on the corner. From the outside, my family looked like the picture-perfect American dream. My father was a manager at a construction company, my mother worked in an office, and my sister and I grew up in a two-story home with a creaking swing on the porch. Outsiders might have thought we were fortunate, but inside those walls, there was always an invisible line. On one side was my sister Vanessa, the radiant source of pride my parents adored, and on the other side was me, quiet and overshadowed, little more than a shadow trailing behind. Vanessa is 2 years older than me and, from a very young age, was praised as a little prodigy. She started ballet at 4, and by 8 she was already on the stage of the community theater, spinning in a glittering white tutu while my parents cried tears of pride. Every photo of Vanessa on stage was enlarged, framed, and hung prominently in the living room. When she joined the high school debate club and won a regional award, my parents took her to New York to celebrate. Every victory, every step Vanessa took became a story my parents retold to every relative at holiday gatherings, and it was always written into the Christmas cards they sent to friends. Our Vanessa, our pride, has just won another award. And me? I wasn't a child with nothing to tell. I loved books, spending hours in my elementary school library, mesmerized by the illustrations in Where the Wild Things Are, and dreaming that one day I could draw my own imaginary worlds. I once entered the school's art contest and won first prize with a landscape of a New England autumn where red leaves blanketed the road leading into the forest. The day I brought the award home, my face lit up, hoping for a proud look from my mother. But she only glanced at it and said coldly, "That's just a hobby, not a future. You should study something more practical." I remember forcing a small smile, nodding as if I agreed, while inside a tiny cut formed, one that over the years accumulated into a deep wound. Every birthday, the difference became clearer. I still remember my 10th birthday when I received a set of colored pencils hastily bought from the supermarket, while just 2 months later, Vanessa was given a brand new electric piano along with a party that had a 3-tier cake and a crowd of friends filling the house. My parents always had a reason. Vanessa needs tools to practice, while you only draw for fun. I never dared to protest, only forced a weak smile as everyone sang happy birthday, pretending that I was happy. Over time, I learned how to give myself small joys. Secretly buying an old book from a secondhand store with the money I saved from walking neighbors' dogs, or filling the pages of my school notebooks with characters from my imagination. No one shared those joys with me, but they were the only things that truly belonged to me. On cold winter evenings, the whole family would gather in the living room to watch recordings of Vanessa's performances, the sound of applause on the tape blending with my parents' voices full of admiration. I would curl up on the sofa, sometimes trying to slip in a comment like, "My painting was also chosen to hang in the school hallway." But my voice was almost always drowned out by discussions of Vanessa's next practice schedule. I became a spectator in my own family, and the most painful part was that, little by little, I grew used to that role. I remember once, when I was about 12, my school organized a children's art exhibition at the local public library. I had been excited all week, carefully preparing my frame and inviting my parents to come see it. On opening day, my friends and teachers were there, praising my painting for being so full of life. But the seats I had saved for my parents were empty. Later, I found out they had taken Vanessa to New York to attend an important debate round. I stood alone in front of my painting, forcing a smile at everyone, trying to convince myself it was fine. But inside, I felt like a ghost, transparent, never important enough for my parents to notice. I slowly learned how to suppress my feelings, to smile when I wasn't happy, to act normal when I was left behind. At night, when everyone was asleep, I would sit by the window and write in a small diary the dreams and sadness no one knew about. I wrote about wanting, one day, for someone to see me, truly see me, not just as Vanessa's shadow. Those years taught me one thing. In my family, love was conditional, and the condition only ever applied to one person. I had to find ways to keep myself from breaking, to learn how to give myself comfort and belief. Sometimes I smiled at my own reflection in the mirror, not because I was happy, but because if I didn't smile at myself, no one else would. Entering high school, I carried with me a quiet determination. If I could never be my parents' pride, then, at the very least, I would prove that I was worthy of being seen. I buried myself in books, joined the science club, and spent hours running small experiments in the school lab, thrilled every time I won a prize at district-level science fairs. I still remember the time I successfully built a miniature solar panel using recycled materials. My teacher praised me, saying I had creative thinking and could go far if I kept pursuing it. That day, I came home with the certificate in hand, excitement bubbling inside me as I imagined how surprised my parents would be. But when I showed it to them, my father only shook his head indifferently and said, "Vanessa has already been accepted into an internship program at a prestigious law firm. What you've done is nothing compared to your sister." Those words cut through my fragile joy like a knife. The older I grew, the clearer the gap between Vanessa and me became. While I struggled to prove myself in small, overlooked corners, she walked on a path lined with light. I saw my father take her shopping for a gown for the school's fundraising gala, while I had to borrow an old dress from a friend just to have something to wear for my science project presentation. The night before the presentation, I stayed up late, carefully cutting and pasting my poster board to make it as polished as possible, hoping my parents would be proud, hoping at the very least they would listen to me speak. But the next morning, when I asked them to come watch, my mother sighed and said, "Vanessa has a debate rehearsal today, you can go by yourself." I nodded silently, carrying a poster board bigger than myself as I boarded the bus alone. Moments like those carved themselves into my memory, making me feel invisible even within my own family. It wasn't that I lacked achievements, but that mine were always compared, dismissed, and overshadowed. I felt like a child endlessly throwing a ball into empty space, waiting for someone to catch it, only to be met with cold silence. There is one memory that still haunts me. When I was 15, the school allowed students to host a small exhibition in the library to showcase independent projects. I chose a topic that combined science and art. A series of hand-drawn paintings depicting the life cycle of stars, paired with a model I built using LED lights and foil. I worked tirelessly for 3 weeks, staying up late to glue on every detail, adjusting the lights so the model would look as vivid as possible. On opening day, my friends, teachers, and even other parents came, walking around, marveling at my display. I smiled, nodding to thank them, but my eyes kept drifting toward the door. I believed my parents would come, even if they were late. But when the library doors closed at 7 o'clock that evening, the seats I had saved for them were still empty. I overheard a few parents saying, "Her parents must be busy, such a shame, her project is incredible." I forced myself to smile, but when the exhibition ended and I stepped outside, I saw a message in our family group chat. a photo of Vanessa on stage in New York, competing at the national debate tournament, my parents in the front row, clapping proudly. Beneath the photo, my mother had written, "We are so proud, Vanessa, the shining star of our family." I sat on the library steps, staring at my phone's screen, feeling as though my heart had dropped somewhere deep inside me. All the effort, all the waiting, it all seemed to vanish in an instant. That night, I didn't cry. I simply opened my diary and scribbled a few lines. Once again, I'm invisible, but I won't let myself disappear. I'll find a way, even if it's only to prove it to myself. I closed the notebook and sat quietly in the dark. In that moment, I realized that my parents' silence had shaped part of who I was. Patient, stubborn, but also full of cracks. I no longer hoped they would see me. I only hoped that one day I could look in the mirror and see myself, not Vanessa's shadow. The turning point came when I received an acceptance letter from a prestigious university in Boston. That day, my hands trembled as I opened the envelope, my eyes blurring when I saw the word "Congratulations." It was the result of all those long nights studying under a desk lamp, of notebooks filled to the margins with notes, and of the countless times I had pushed myself twice as hard just to prove I had value. I had hoped my parents would smile, hug me, or at least say congratulations. But when I handed them the letter, my mother only nodded blandly and said, "That's good. Vanessa is preparing to apply to some of the most prestigious programs in New York. She'll surely be accepted." The praise I had been waiting for vanished like smoke, leaving me with the familiar emptiness. Starting college, I told myself I would begin a different life, free from the suffocating shadow of Vanessa. But that also meant I had to be completely independent. My parents claimed my tuition and living expenses were too much of a burden, so I had to figure everything out on my own. I studied while working part-time at a cafe near campus. The rich smell of roasted coffee, the whir of the grinder, and the shifts stretching late into the night became part of my daily life. Some days, after class, I would pedal my bike to the cafe, tie on my apron, and force a polite smile at customers while my mind was already spinning with the assignments I still had to finish. Outside of my cafe shifts, I also picked up freelance graphic design work for a few small shops. The first orders only paid a few $dozen, but to me, that money meant freedom. I spent long nights tinkering on my old laptop, adjusting every detail of a banner or logo until it was perfect. Each time I received a thank you email from a client, I felt a little piece of my heart being filled, as if someone was finally acknowledging my effort. Even with my exhausting schedule, I pushed myself to study as hard as I could. One time, my research project on the application of digital technology in marketing was selected to be published in the school newspaper. It was a huge step forward, and I immediately emailed my parents, hoping that this time they would be proud. I even attached the link, excited to show them that my name had appeared on the front page of the student section. But their reply was only a single line. "Vanessa just got hired at a major law firm in Manhattan." I sat frozen in front of the screen, my chest tightening as though it had been squeezed. All my effort, in their eyes, was nothing more than filler news before they could brag about my sister. I began to realize that no matter what I did, in this family I would always be the faint shadow standing behind Vanessa's spotlight. Amid those exhausting months, I was lucky enough to meet Rachel, my dorm roommate. Rachel was the kind of person who radiated warmth. She often left little sticky notes on my desk. "Don't forget to eat breakfast," or "You've got this, Ashley." When I came back late from work, collapsing into a chair with fatigue, Rachel would hand me a hot cup of tea and say, "You deserve to be proud of yourself, even if your family doesn't see it." Those words, simple as they seemed, became the medicine that kept me standing. Not long after, I met David, a classmate from one of my core courses. We started talking when he sat next to me in the library, both of us buried under towering stacks of books. Unlike people who only cared about appearances, David noticed the way I persisted, the way I refused to give up even while juggling part-time jobs and endless tasks. One time, when I told him I often worked until 3 in the morning just to finish both my assignments and my design deadlines, he didn't laugh or criticize. Instead, he looked at me with genuine admiration. Ashley, it's this persistence that makes you special. Not prestige, not praise from others. It's the way you never give up. My eyes welled up because, for the first time, someone truly saw who I was, not the version constantly compared, dismissed, or overlooked. As my college years went by, I studied, worked, and tried to build for myself a small world where I could be me. I no longer waited for replies to my emails from my parents because I knew the answer would always be another version of Vanessa. Instead, I turned to Rachel, to David, and to friends who were ready to clap for me when I achieved something, no matter how small. I learned to hold my pain close, to turn it into fuel that pushed me forward. But deep down, the wound from my parents' indifference never truly healed. Every time I saw Vanessa being taken out to celebrate by our parents, her pictures posted online, my heart ached. I kept asking myself, would they ever see me, not as an outsider, but as a daughter worthy of love? And yet, the answer seemed painfully obvious. Graduating from college, I stepped into the world with a degree in hand and a fragile belief that I could finally define my own life. I landed my first job at a marketing firm in downtown Boston. It wasn't a prestigious position, just a new hire in a crowded office, but to me, it was the beginning of a journey to prove my true worth. Those early days were tough as I struggled to keep up with the fast pace. The constant pressure of looming deadlines, demanding clients, and ad campaigns that needed dozens of revisions weighed heavily on me. There were nights I stayed alone in the office, rain pouring against the windows outside, while I kept typing at my laptop, eyes burning with exhaustion yet refusing to stop until the report was done. Many times, I wondered if I was pushing myself too hard, but then the memory of years spent being dismissed drove me forward. I couldn't give up. I had to prove that I could succeed. Little by little, I grew in that environment. I learned how to analyze data, how to read customer psychology, and, most importantly, how to stand back up after every failure. The first ad campaign I ever worked on didn't meet expectations, and our whole team was scolded by the manager. I remember quietly crying in the bathroom, but the very next day I returned to my desk, rewrote every strategy, and pinpointed where we had gone wrong. That failure became my first real lesson in resilience. The big opportunity came when the company decided to rebrand a long-standing retail chain that had been losing customers. It was a critical project, and my boss assigned me as the lead, a decision that filled me with both excitement and nerves. I threw myself into the work with everything I had, surveying hundreds of customers, studying market trends, and collaborating with the creative team to rebuild the brand's image. For weeks, I practically lived at the office. Mornings spent in design meetings, afternoons consulting with clients, evenings refining presentations. Some nights I only managed a quick nap in my swivel chair before jolting awake to keep working. When the campaign finally launched, we rolled out a series of ads that emphasized family values and the brand's sense of closeness. The stores were redesigned with warm color tones, and the new signage glowed brightly across city streets. Then something incredible happened. Within just 3 months, revenue soared, customers returned, and the retail chain became a textbook example of a successful rebrand in the local marketing world. For the first time in my life, I was publicly recognized. A Boston business magazine interviewed me and published a full feature with a photo of me standing in front of the newly reopened store. Seeing my name in print, I felt shock and deep emotion, remembering all those years of invisibility in my childhood. I thought, finally, someone sees me. Amid the joy, I tried once more to share it with my parents. I sent them the article with a message. I did it. This is the first big step in my career. I longed for at least one word of praise, one expression of pride. But their reply came back as a single, short text. Vanessa is getting married. That's the real good news. I sat frozen, staring at the glowing screen as the old familiar feeling washed over me like an icy wave. All my achievements, all my effort, dismissed once again in a single sentence. But this time, instead of letting myself collapse, I suddenly realized something important. My worth didn't need my parents' stamp of approval. The MBA degree I was about to receive, the success of the rebrand project, the article in the magazine, all of it was undeniable proof that I had walked my own path. I was no longer that child waiting for a glance of recognition. I had learned how to recognize myself. That night, after reading my parents' message, I didn't cry like before. I poured myself a cup of tea, opened my laptop, and looked back at the images from the campaign I had just led to success. In the smiles of customers, in the excitement of my teammates, I saw my true value. I didn't need empty compliments. I didn't need my name written into Christmas cards as something to brag about to relatives. I had value because I had created change, because I had persisted without giving up. And for the first time, I understood that the greatest recognition comes from daring to look in the mirror and see a strong, independent woman writing her own story. The day of my MBA graduation approached like a dream, both surreal and real. For months, I had counted down the days, filled with both nerves and excitement. Years of relentless studying, countless late-night shifts, and moments where I nearly collapsed had all led to this moment. I had carefully chosen my graduation attire, pressing the gown and cap until they were crisp. Standing before the old mirror in my apartment, I looked at myself, not the little girl who had once been dismissed, but a 24-year-old woman who had walked out of the shadows to stand here. Deep inside, I held onto a fragile hope that after all the times my parents had failed to show up, this time they would come. This wasn't a small contest, not an art exhibit at the library, it was an MBA graduation, a milestone any family would be proud of. I convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. That morning, Boston's sky was a rare, brilliant blue, sunlight spilling over the red brick buildings surrounding the campus. Hundreds of students in black gowns gathered, their laughter mingling with the rapid clicks of cameras. I walked into the grand auditorium, the scent of fresh flowers from the bouquets parents had brought filling the air. Looking around, I saw my classmates glowing as they posed for pictures with their families, hugging their parents, smiling through tears of joy. In my chest, hope swelled as my eyes searched the crowd, landing on the row where I had reserved 2 seats for my parents. The seats were still empty. I told myself they must be running late, maybe stuck in traffic, maybe just a few minutes more. I forced a smile even as my hands trembled around the invitation I had sent them weeks before. When my name was called, I walked up to the stage, each step echoing through the hall. The lights from above glinted off my gown, but inside me rose a hollow ache. I took the diploma from the dean's hands, trying to smile for the commemorative photo. Then I glanced down at the audience, at the 2 empty chairs. They stood out like patches of cold darkness amid the sea of flowers and applause. Around me, friends' names were shouted by their parents, clapping thundered, bright bouquets were thrown into the air. And me, only the endless space answered back. A voice echoed in my head, sharp as a needle. To them, this is nothing but a trivial event for a bottom daughter. I stood there, a wave of emotion nearly knocking me to my knees. But I held it in, lifted my head high, and swallowed the tears back down. I would not let myself cry here, not in front of my classmates, not on the day I had fought so hard to earn. I returned to my seat, clutching the diploma as if it were the last piece of pride I had left. The cheers around me echoed, but to me, they were only distant sounds, unable to reach the heart that had already gone cold. When the ceremony ended, everyone spilled out into the courtyard, throwing their arms around their families, exchanging flowers, and snapping photos. I stood alone, quietly slipping my graduation cap into my bag. In that moment, I realized my parents' absence wasn't just another missed occasion, it was the final punctuation mark on whatever hope I had left for them. I pulled out my phone, scrolling mindlessly through social media as if searching for something to dull the ache. Instead of silence, I stumbled into something far crueler. On Facebook, my mother's latest post lit up the screen. A video aboard a Caribbean cruise. There she was, dressed in a sparkling gown, holding up a champagne glass with a radiant smile. Beside her stood Vanessa in an elegant dress, her arm linked with her fiancé's. Laughter surrounded them, confetti bursting in the background. The caption beneath the video squeezed my chest like a vice, celebrating our shining star, Vanessa. My eyes locked on the screen, my hands trembling. While I stood alone at my MBA graduation, my parents were toasting my sister, calling her the shining star of the family. I sank down onto the steps outside the auditorium, watching my classmates glowing with bouquets in their arms while I held my phone like a knife twisting deeper into me. Pain that had always been private was now laid bare on social media, a public confirmation that I had never been and would never be a source of pride in my parents' eyes. I bit my lip until it bled, fighting to hold back the tears. But in the end, they fell anyway, landing on the screen, blurring the bright caption. In that moment, I understood that my silence, my invisibility in the family, had now turned into an outright public rejection. And there I sat, surrounded by the joyful laughter of others, feeling as though the world had just slammed its last door in my face. A week after my MBA graduation, when everything should have settled enough for me to find a little peace, my phone rang. On the screen appeared two familiar letters, Dad. I hesitated before answering, still holding on to a fragile hope that, after everything, he was calling to offer a late congratulations. To say some small word of comfort. But his voice came through cold and clipped, without a trace of warmth. Ashley, your student loan hasn't been paid off. It's time for you to contribute to Vanessa's wedding. I went completely still. I gripped the phone so tightly it felt as if the blood in my body had stopped flowing. Unpaid loan? I repeated in my head, unable to believe my ears. I had paid off every single dollar of my student debt myself through late-night cafe shifts that stretched past midnight, through freelance graphic design contracts that kept me awake until dawn to meet deadlines. I remembered clearly every time I logged into my bank account, watching the balance drain as I transferred each payment. Every click of submit payment felt like one more step toward freedom. I had done it entirely on my own, without a single cent from my parents. And now my father was conjuring up an imaginary debt to force me into funding Vanessa's lavish wedding. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. Dad, I've paid off my loan myself. I have every receipt and bank record. You and Mom never contributed a penny. But he didn't listen. His voice rolled on as though reading from a prepared script. Don't argue, Ashley. Family is about sacrifice. Vanessa is our pride, and her wedding is the most important event. You have to do your part. In that moment, I saw clearly that this wasn't a misunderstanding, it was manipulation. A familiar tactic to turn me into the shadow that served Vanessa's dream. All through my childhood, I'd been compared, ignored. But now they were trying to seize even my sweat and blood for something I had never been invited to or agreed to. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up every bank record I had. One by one, I clicked through the PDF files, scrolling past the receipts I had carefully saved. Page after page, the numbers told the truth. I had paid off the loan myself. Not a single transfer had ever come from my parents' accounts. It was all me, the trivial daughter they had never been proud of, quietly carrying the weight, only to be turned into a debtor now. A lump of rage rose in my throat. I thought of my graduation with those two empty chairs, of the Facebook video where my parents raised champagne glasses to Vanessa. And now, just a week later, they demanded money for her wedding under the excuse of an unpaid loan. It wasn't just unfair, it was an insult. They wanted to twist the success I had fought for in silence into yet another tool to exploit me. I picked up the phone. When my father answered, I didn't bother softening my tone anymore. That loan is paid. Every cent. And you never contributed. I spoke slowly, emphasizing each word so he couldn't twist the truth. On the other end, his voice dropped, heavy and sharp. Ashley, don't you dare talk back. This family has sacrificed more for you than you realize. You're being ungrateful. My mother immediately cut in, her shrill voice pressing against my ear. You need to learn to put family above yourself. Vanessa deserves a perfect wedding, and we all of us have to carry that together. Deck. I closed my eyes and let the memories flood back. The two empty seats at my graduation, the Caribbean video on Facebook. And now these accusations that I was ungrateful. I knew that if I stayed silent one more time, the cycle would never end. I opened my eyes, my voice cutting through the air with finality. Don't talk to me about sacrifice. Real family shows up for the important moments. And you didn't. Don't contact me about trivial matters. Family shows up, and you didn't. End of. A heavy silence followed my words. I could hear my mother's breathing quicken, my father's teeth grinding, but I didn't give them the chance to answer back. I hung up. For the first time in my life, I felt an unfamiliar lightness, like I had finally set down a stone that had been crushing my chest for 24 years. But I knew one cut phone call wasn't enough. My family's greatest skill was twisting the truth, turning victims into villains. I couldn't let them continue to spin a story where I was the ungrateful child. So that very night, I opened my laptop and began drafting an email. The subject line read, "The truth, my story." I sent it to every relative in our extended family: grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, the people who usually only heard my parents' version of events. The words poured out of me, as if my hands were writing directly from my heart. I laid everything out clearly, without hesitation. At my MBA graduation, the biggest milestone of my life, my parents never showed up. They left 2 empty chairs in a hall filled with flowers and applause, choosing instead to celebrate with my sister on a Caribbean cruise. They fabricated a story that I hadn't paid off my student loan. The truth, I paid every cent myself through part-time jobs and sleepless nights. Attached here are all receipts and bank statements as proof. 1. For years, I had been treated as invisible, my accomplishments brushed aside while every spotlight shone on Vanessa. And today, they were still trying to use me to fund her lavish dream. I wrote this email not to ask for pity, but to let the truth be known. I would no longer allow myself to be exploited, trampled, or turned into a shadow. I wasn't cutting off family, I was cutting off the lies and manipulation. Anyone who wished to stay in touch with me in honesty, I would welcome. But if not, I was prepared to walk alone. I finished typing, read it over once, and pressed send. As the soft chime of the sent email echoed, a sense of release spread through my veins. I had spoken everything out loud, there was nothing left to hide. Right after, I opened my phone's contacts and one by one blocked my father, my mother, and the relatives who had stood with them. Each tap of my finger felt like closing an old, splintered door. Behind it lay accusations, contemptuous glances, and all the times I'd been abandoned. But as the doors closed, a new space opened before me, silent but clean. That night, my apartment was wrapped in quiet. I sat by the window, watching the city lights of Boston flicker in the distance. For the first time, I no longer flinched at the sound of a phone ringing, no longer braced myself for my parents to demand another sacrifice. I leaned my forehead against the glass and whispered, "I did it." I set my boundaries. And in that stillness, I realized that sometimes saying no is the bravest act of all, the first step toward a new life. And indeed, just a few days later, the first ripples began to spread. My grandmother called me, her voice trembling. "Ashley, is it true they didn't come to your graduation? An MBA degree is no small thing." I could hear the disappointment in her tone, followed by a whisper. "For decades, they've paraded Vanessa around like a treasure and left you outside. Now everyone can see it." After that call, I received message after message from aunts and uncles. Some offered comfort, some apologized for believing the stories my parents had spun, and some simply wrote, "We always wondered why she was standing alone. Now we understand." While I remained silent, the whispers in the family grew louder. At the next relatives' gathering, my story became the center of conversation. People murmured, "Who calls an MBA graduation trivial? Who abandons their own daughter like that?" Many were shocked to learn that my parents had been sailing on a cruise while their daughter graduated. The very photos my mother had proudly posted of Vanessa now stood as undeniable evidence against them. Vanessa's fiancé, Mark, seemed to get pulled into the storm as well. One evening, I heard from a friend that he had confronted my parents at dinner. "I don't understand, how could you miss Ashley's MBA graduation? That's not something small. You called it trivial? Where's the fairness in that?" My friend told me the table went silent, my parents dodged the question, and Vanessa sat with her head bowed. A question so simple, yet it cracked the perfect family image they had tried to build for so long. Some of my parents' old friends began to distance themselves as well. In the neighborhood where they lived, summer barbecues had always been a chance to boast about their children, but now those gatherings turned into places where people looked at them differently. At one barbecue that summer, when my father tried to laugh and say, "Ashley is just stubborn, she likes to do everything on her own," the neighbors only exchanged glances, no one chimed in. Someone quietly asked, "But her graduation? Why would you miss that?" My father quickly changed the subject. My mother forced a strained smile, but the admiration they were used to had vanished. Vanessa wasn't immune to the pressure either. At her workplace, some colleagues had seen the story unfold on social media and whispered behind her back. Her sister just earned an MBA and their parents called it trivial. That's strange. Mark, her fiancé, had also shifted his tone. Vanessa began to feel the loneliness that came when the spotlight which once bathed her now revealed the cracks in the family instead. And me? I didn't feel triumphant. There was no sense of victory in any of this. I simply observed quietly, like a spectator standing off stage, letting the consequences reveal themselves. I didn't need any further explanations, nor did I want to jump into arguments. What I had written in my email was enough, and the truth would find its own way. I focused my time on my work, on my friends, the people who had always been there for me. One night, walking along the Charles River, the cold wind brushed against my face. I stopped, watching the water flow, asking myself, was I right? But then I remembered the 2 empty seats at my graduation, my father's voice demanding money for Vanessa's wedding on false pretenses, the years I'd been treated as invisible. And I knew I wasn't wrong. I hadn't done anything to get revenge, I had only spoken the truth. And whether that truth made someone uncomfortable or cost someone their pride was no longer my responsibility. In that silence, I found the first true peace I had felt in years. I didn't need to defeat my parents. I only needed to defeat the fear inside me, the fear of being abandoned, of being denied. And once I let that go, I realized something. Sometimes the greatest consequence for those who do wrong doesn't come from shouting or revenge, but from silence itself. After all the storms, I realized I no longer wanted to look back. Instead, I turned my attention to the people who had truly been present through the hardest years. David, Rachel, and a few friends I had come to see as family. With them, I didn't have to prove anything. I didn't have to achieve something dazzling just to be recognized. I only had to be myself, tired at times, failing at times, sometimes just sitting in silence and breathing. And still, they stayed, offering me care without conditions. David often came by my small apartment after work, carrying a hot pizza and a cheap bottle of wine. We would sit on the sofa, talk about our jobs, our future plans, and then burst out laughing over the silliest things. He never looked at me as Vanessa's shadow, but as a woman with her own worth, independent and resilient. And Rachel, with her familiar humor, turned my gray days into long strings of laughter. She often dragged me out of the apartment, urging me to walk through Boston Common or spend hours at a tiny cafe on Charles Street, just to remind me that I was worthy of simple joy. As autumn passed and golden leaves blanketed the streets, I decided to host a small Thanksgiving dinner in my apartment. It wasn't a lavish banquet, not a table overflowing with elaborate dishes, just a roast turkey David and I prepared together, some mashed potatoes Rachel had learned from YouTube, and a few simple sides our friends brought along. The little room glowed with candlelight and the soft warmth of yellow string lights. I sat at the table, looking around, familiar faces, bright eyes, laughter echoing off the walls. There was no judgment here, no comparisons, no indifferent stares like the ones in my old family. In that moment, I felt as though I had finally found family in the truest sense, not bound by blood, but chosen. These people didn't need me to audition, didn't need me to step onto a stage to prove I was worthy. They cared for me simply as I was, with every flaw and scar. I was no longer the little girl abandoned at an art exhibit, No longer the student struggling to pay off a loan alone, no longer the woman crumpled before two empty chairs at her graduation. I was Ashley, a person with friends, with love, with a new family. That Thanksgiving night, after everyone had gone and only the soft glow of the last candle remained, I tidied the dishes with my heart still warm. I sat down on my bed, pulled the blanket over myself. For the first time in years, sleep came peacefully. No more recurring dreams of standing next to Vanessa, being compared and pushed aside. No more chasing after a glance of recognition. Instead, in my dream, I saw myself sitting at a small table, surrounded by laughter, feeling what it was like to belong. When I woke up the next morning, sunlight streaming through the window, I realized my heart felt astonishingly light. I no longer needed my parents to validate my worth. I had found my true family, the people who chose me, and the people I chose. And that was enough for me to move forward, enough for me to believe that there was still so much good waiting in my life. Years passed after that MBA graduation, and my life turned into a new chapter. I moved to New York with David and began my career at a leading marketing firm. From a young employee pulling all-nighters just to prove herself, I climbed step by step, proving my ability through each project, each campaign. Then one day, sitting in a glass-walled office overlooking Fifth Avenue, I received the official notice. Creative Director. Holding the letter in my hands, my heart pounded as I remembered that girl once sitting alone by the library window, writing in her diary, "One day, I'll be seen." Now, I wasn't just seen, I was shining on my own. At the same time, my personal life blossomed. David and I married in a small, simple ceremony, surrounded only by close friends, with Rachel standing by my side in her bridesmaid's dress. There were no parents, no hollow displays of pride, only love and sincerity. A few years later, we welcomed our first son, Ethan. Watching him take his first steps, eyes wide with wonder as he explored the world, I silently promised him that he would never feel invisible the way his mother once had. He would grow up in a home where love was not a competition, where it required no conditions, where there would be no shining star and no fading shadow. In our small but warm apartment in New York, I hung a special photo on the living room wall, the photo from my MBA graduation. In it, I'm wearing the black gown, smiling faintly, holding my diploma. But the most striking detail is the two empty chairs in the front row, the seats I had reserved for my parents. Many people ask why I keep a picture that reminds me of such a painful memory. I only smile. To me, those empty chairs are no longer symbols of absence, but reminders of the boundaries I had the courage to set. They remind me that I was once overlooked, once abandoned, but I stood up, defined my own worth, and refused to let anyone else write my story for me. One evening, after I had just laid Ethan down in his crib, I sat on the sofa and looked at that photo. In the quiet space, I whispered, "Family is not about blood, it's about the people who stay." I thought of David, of Rachel, of the friends who had walked alongside me. I thought of Ethan, my son, who would grow up surrounded by love in all its fullness. And I thought of myself, the girl once called trivial, now a woman strong enough to redefine what family means. And I want to send this message to everyone listening to my story. If you have ever been abandoned, compared, told you weren't good enough, not bright enough, just trivial, in the eyes of family or society, remember that your worth doesn't need anyone's stamp of approval. You don't need someone to fill a seat in the audience to prove you belong. Your worth lives inside you, in every drop of sweat, in every step you take through hardship. You have the right to define who you are, and you have the right to build a family rooted in real love, not in false expectations. The day I graduated with my MBA, those two empty chairs were the deepest pain of my life. But years later, when I look back, they have become symbols of strength. Because of that absence, I learned how to stand on my own. Because of that rejection, I realized I didn't need anyone's approval to exist. And because of those scars, I came to cherish the people who truly chose to stay by my side. So if you're listening to this story and you see yourself somewhere in it, believe me, you are not alone. There are people like me who once sat beside empty chairs, who once heard laughter coming from elsewhere while we were left behind. And yet, we still stood up, we still kept walking, and we still found the light. That's why you must never let anyone define you as trivial. You are enough. You are worthy. And only you hold the pen to write the story of your own life.